All right guys, so this is the second part of our series on how to build a longbow from a maple board that you can get from Home Depot or Lowe's or pretty much any hardware store. And just to show you what we're going to end up with, it's going to be something very similar to this. This is a 70-pound or 70-inch bow that pulls about 50 pounds at 28 inches. So on the last video, we went ahead and picked out our board. We brought it back and we drew out the profile and went ahead and cut out the profile on the back of this bow. If you haven't seen that first video, what I would suggest is go ahead and watch this one all the way through and then go back and watch that first one, and then a lot of what you see in this one is going to make more sense. We're going to go ahead today and get this bow floor tillered, and then we're going to put a little bit of back set in it and back it with rawhide, and that's going to prep us for the final stage, which is tillering. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So you need to decide before you start removing wood off this thing, you need to decide which is going to be the back and which is going to be the belly. Now on this particular board, what helped me to make that decision is right here, there's actually a little bitty bug hole in this thing, and I do not want that on the back of the bow. If we put it on the belly of the bow, when we're taking wood off, we're probably going to take that little hole out of there. So if there's any imperfections in one side of the board versus the other, you need to have the more perfect side be the back. We should have picked out a board to start with no knots or grain runoff or anything like that, like we talked about in the first video. All right, so to get started here, I've got my handle section laid out, my 10-inch handle section like we laid out last time. I'm just going to start about where that handle flares out and gets to the widest portion of the limb or the end of that handle section. I'm going to start right there, and I'm just going to start taking wood off of the corners here to kind of round those corners off. So I'm just crowning this belly off a little bit. And once we get this thing bending, we'll kind of flatten this belly back out a little bit. But if you keep it crowned like that, it's a whole lot easier to take wood off. And each time I start a new stroke with this block plane here, I'm coming back to where my handle section ends, right here. When you're leaning this block plane over like this on the side, you want to watch that you're not getting your edges too close. You don't want to roll this edge around too close to the back here. You want to maintain 3/6 or 3/8, maybe a 1/4 inch right along here. If you want to, you can use your compass here to scribe a line to help you to maintain that. Just don't go down below that. Go ahead and flip it around and start on the other limb a little bit. Got this one bending just a little. So we want this thing, we need to get it bending a little bit before we put our backing on there, because we're going to put this thing in a jig and put a little bit of backset in it. And if we don't have it bending, if we don't have the limb tips bending right, when we put it in that jig, all the bend is going to come from this narrowed handle section. You'll have like a V shape. But if you get the limbs kind of partially tillered out, they'll have a nice flex to them when we tie it down into this jig. So you're basically just looking, when you put this thing, put the tip of this limb on the ground and push on the handle just a little bit, you're looking for a nice even bend. Looks like we're getting there. We can still take a little bit off. I'm going to go ahead and slide this down a little bit so that my limb is actually in the vise. And I'm going to start rounding this handle section off a little bit, just so that it's going to be more comfortable when we hold it. If you angle, if you're using a hand plane, you know, if you keep this thing perfectly in line with the bow, your block plane is going to span this where the handle dips in, and you're not going to be able to take anything off. But if you angle that thing just a little bit, you can get down into those recesses. So you see that nice smooth arc, that's what we're looking for. Check the other limb out. Looking pretty good. So last thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna round these corners off on the back just a little bit so that it's not such an abrupt edge. I want that backing to kind of roll over the edges just a little bit. Got that sticker I gotta get off of there. So I'm gonna take my plane, just maybe take 2 or 3 strokes off each side, just to round them off a little bit. Yeah, this is gonna, how many you take off is gonna depend on how fine you've got your block plane set. Basically, I'm just making like, taking maybe 1/8 of an inch off each side. And then right here in the handle section as well. So I've just got some 80 grit sandpaper here. I'm going to use this to kind of round those corners off a little better. So one thing you want to do before we back it is just look down this thing and make sure that there's no like where we laid the bow out and cut these limb tips in, like right here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I've got a little bit of a hump here. I want to take that off real quick. So just look down this thing and make sure everything looks good. Got a little bit of a hump right here I'm going to take off. And what I mean by hump is, you know, these limbs are parallel until they get to the last 12 inches, and then they start tapering in towards these nocks. Well, there was a bit of an angle. When I rasped these limb tips off, I didn't round them off really well. And so it goes here straight and then it angles in. And so I just want to take the top of that angle off so that it kind of fades into the limb tip a little bit better. That looks pretty good. So when you're floor tillering these bows, you don't want to stress them more than you need to. All you want to do is bend them just far enough so that you can really get a good idea of how these limbs are bending, and so you can see where you have stiff spots or weak spots so that you'll know where to take more wood off. Bending it more than necessary at this stage is just gonna cause it to take on set or string follow. And what I mean by that is when you unstring a bow, ideally it's gonna go back flat or even have a little bit of back set where the limb tips are resting forward of the handle. And set is when you unstring a bow, it basically like stays bent, and that is makes for a less efficient bow. It's something that we want to avoid at all costs. So one of the ways to avoid that is not stressing the wood beyond what is absolutely needed at that point in the bow making process. All right, so we are ready to go ahead and put this thing in the jig and put a little bit of back set in it, and then we'll go ahead and slap the rawhide backing on this thing. Before we move on, I'd like to make quick mention of another great resource when it comes to traditional archery and traditional bow hunting, and that is Traditional Bowhunter Magazine. I've been a TBM subscriber for a long time. They've always got really good hunting stories in here and great how-to articles, which is what I really like about it. If you haven't subscribed to the magazine, I'd highly recommend you do so. It's a great publication, and they've also got a great discussion forum over on their website at tradbow.com, which I also hit up on occasion. So if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and do so, and we'll see you over there. So what I want to do is right in the dead center of this bow, I'm going to go ahead and just tie it down. So the reason you need a thin cord right here is because we're going to lay our rawhide back, and right over that, we're going to glue it down, and we need to be able to cut this and slip that out. So a big cord or a rope or something just isn't going to work. All right, so now that we've got the center tied down here, I've got a couple of blocks here. They're about 3 inches long. I'm just going to raise the tips up and stick those blocks right under there. You don't have to use, this is a kind of stressing this thing a little bit more than I might recommend to a beginner. So you might end up trying just a 1 or 2 inch block to start with, but the more back set you can get into them, the better performance you're going to get. So Now what we're gonna do is go ahead and lay our rawhide backing on there, and then we're gonna put this somewhere where it can dry. All right, so I've got a cup of warm water here, and I've got a couple of backing strips, rawhide backing strips. I'm just gonna roll these up and stick them down in that water. You don't want your water to be hot. If you can't hold your finger in it comfortably, it's too hot. If you use too hot, if your water's too hot, you're gonna cook your rawhide. The rawhide you can make yourself, or I sell the strips, 2 strips on my website. So we're gonna let that sit for probably, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, let it rehydrate. So I'm just laying these strips on here just to make sure I've got everything that's gonna fit before I glue them down. Now you want a little bit of overlap here in the handle. All right, so that's gonna work. I'm going ahead and just put these right here. All right, so I use Titebond 2 or Titebond 3, and it works pretty doggone good for rawhide backings. So I'm gonna put a pretty generous amount on the back. You don't want it, I mean, anything extra that you put on here is just gonna squish out the sides and make a mess. So just kind of smooth that out. Make sure you got a nice even coat. So now we just need to lay our rawhide right on the back. Now where they overlap, you're going to want to put a little bit of glue on top of this other piece so they'll stick down. All right, now how do we hold this rawhide down while it is drying? Some old jogging pants. These are actually polypropylene underwear. Polypro sucks. So these big 3-inch blocks kind of make this a little bit difficult. If you don't put quite as much backset, or if your board here is a little thinner, be a little easier. But we need to get this over that rawhide. We might have to readjust our rawhide once we get it on there. There we go. There we go. All right. So on this, basically all I did was take a pair of jogging pants. These are actually a polypropylene base layer that I didn't use anymore. 100% merino, that's what you want for your base layer. So to secure the rawhide down like this, the reason I like doing it like this is because we're gonna lay a heavy piece of pipe. Let's go ahead and do that. Right down here in the bottom of this. Now that holds that rawhide back and down there, and it holds those edges down and over. Now, the way I used to do it is I'd take an old strips of old t-shirt or ace bandage or something like that, and I would wrap it. And you can do it that way, but it can be very difficult when you come up with that wrap. It can lift the rawhide and shift it over, and it makes it very difficult to get that rawhide sitting down on there just perfect. But if you do it with some old stretchy pants material like this, it works super well. And you want stretchy material so that it follows the form of the bow, like especially if you're doing a recurve or something with reflex limb tips. If you tried to use like pants legs off of jeans, they're too stiff. They don't have enough give to follow that form. But with something like this, it follows it perfectly. Just bring it out and kind of bring it over the end like that. You may need to put a clamp on there, but you won't normally need to do that. Now when you get your pants leg on there, go ahead and squeegee out any bubbles that may have formed underneath that when you put that rawhide on there. Then we'll go to the other side and do the other one. All right, so we've got the rawhide backing on there. We've got it all secured. Now we just need to give it a couple of days to dry. I'm gonna let this dry outside initially, and then since it's November here in Idaho, it's actually very warm for November, but it is humid and it's wet. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this in the house, let it dry in there for a couple of days. This rawhide should be, as long as you keep it in a dry, warm place, it should be completely cured in 2 days. And one way that you can test to see if it's cured or not is you can try to push your thumbnail into it, and if you can dent it easily, it's not dry. This rawhide gets very hard when it's completely dry. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that, and because we're going to be following this video up with another one where we're going to finish this bow off, and then we're going to go and shoot it. We're actually going to shoot it through the chronograph to see how fast it shoots. And also, if you like seeing this type of content, and if you want to see more content like this, go ahead and leave a comment, give us a thumbs up. And if you have any questions about anything that we did here, go ahead and ask them in the comments, and I'll try to respond to as many of those as I can. On the next video, like I said before, we're going to go ahead and finish this bow off. We're going to go through the tillering process, and then we're going to go shoot it through the chrono to see what it does. So with that, we'll see you next time.